to Writer, a program for and about writers. It's sponsored by Florida Community College at Jacksonville. I'm Susan Shaw, your host, and with me is Dori Sanders. And Dori, thanks for joining us on Writer to Writer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I have to say that it is really a pleasure to meet you after reading your books, Clover and A Place of Her Own.
All right.
We're going to talk about these books. They're wonderful, and there's so much history about you, and we want to find out where these ideas came from.
Perfect.
Tell us a little bit about your background, Dori. Where do you come from before you became a writer?
Well, I guess I have to answer that by saying where I still am, because what I was doing when I started writing, can you believe I still do to this day? I am a South Carolina peach farmer, certified, however, wonderfully so, and I still live on and still farm the family land where I was born. My daddy was a rural elementary school principal, but in the old days when they had the very tiny rural schoolhouses, and I am from a family of 10 children. Wow. I am number 8 in that family of 10, 5 brothers, 4 sisters, and there are 4 of us still on the family land that has been in our family for many years.
You were about to give away some numbers there.
Well over 75 years, I'll say.
Wow.
And that's how long it's been in the family.
And you all work the farm together.
We do. Not that we always do it in the best way. We don't always get along that wonderfully well because everybody wants someone else to do a little more work. But with the 2 brothers, 2 sisters, we still steady at it. I have my very own tractor finally in my whole life. It's an old Massey Ferguson 245. My brother has the 235. And we're steady at it, steady at the farming work. And we sell most of our produce right alongside a busy highway, number 321, just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And we have wonderful repeat customers who come year after year for our wonderful peaches and produce.
And you sell the things just like in Clover. When
Yes, I do.
Clover's family is doing the same exact thing.
They say if you do base a novel, especially with its setting, its theme, on things that you do know, then you're perhaps in a better circumstance to present a work of fiction that's more convincing and believable. That's what they say, and I tend to agree.
But what they say, does it work?
I think it does. Because you see, if you know about the farming life, then the reader will be pulled into your world and will believe that you really know what you're talking about. And even if you don't know, I think in the end, you'll have some editor that will pull you down. I don't know how they know so much. But editors seem to know everything. They're not even farmers, and they seem to know more about the farming life than I do. If I make the least little mistake, I'll have an editor say, is that technically correct with the farming life? And I'll have to sometimes even take a second look myself. It has to be based on fact, although we label it fiction in order to be convincing and to be believed by the reader that it's real.
Let me ask you about your characters. We'll talk about Clover first. Clover is a wonderful book.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored to hear you say that.
Now tell me a little bit about who Clover is, just so everybody knows.
All right. Sometimes I think people tend to think Dori Sanders is Clover. No.
I wondered about that
There
too.
was nothing, absolutely nothing in my background, in my life that would have prepared me to be that little character Clover. For example, Clover lives today in a totally integrated society with even a white stepmama. I was born, raised in a totally segregated society in the South. But something happened one day that caused me to write that novel. And may I quickly tell you what happened? All right. My peach shade, where I sell that produce, is right alongside a busy highway, Highway 321, running north and south, just outside the North Carolina line. One day while funeral watching, as a funeral procession passed the peach shed, I watched and noticed that in that funeral procession, led by a county police car, slowly moving with a blue light, leading them through the countryside, that it was an all-black funeral. I watched even more closely. I figured it had to be someone I did know, but I did not know a single person. And from one of those cars, a little girl, a little black girl that I figured in my head must have been about 10 years old. She looked out at me, at my peaches, and that little girl waved. The saddest little wave I've ever seen in my life. I waved back. and wondered who that little girl might have been. Later that same day, down that same highway with the same procedure, there was an all-white funeral. And a woman, a white woman, with her window down on that hot summer's day, looked out at me and at my peaches. We made eye contact, but we were grown up, so we didn't wave or nothing, but she was sad, and I seemed to have shared her sadness. And that got me to wondering and thinking about death, how universal it all is, and that no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter how color of skin, how much money, if you live long enough, you'll know about it. And then that's when it all started. I have never had the writing classes, did not even desire in my life to become a writer, but the what if seeded my thinking and my thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I wondered what would happen if that little girl wound up with that woman. So in my imagination that just seemed to start to soar, I pulled a little black girl out the car, named her Clover, and she wound up with a new stepmama named Sarah Kate. Total fiction. Total fiction.
Just two separate incidents brought together in a wonderful book called Clover.
Thank you. That's exactly how it happened.
And when you talk about the little girl waving,
yes.
That is an exact, I mean, it's in the book. I mean, Clover is in the funeral procession going to her, father's funeral.
Never get her out of
and
my
she's
head.
Waving.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there.
Remember with the children, she said that were watching it, she said they waved to me, I waved back. It was how it happened. Mm-hmm. It was how it happened.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, how autobiographical is Clover? I mean, obviously now you're not Clover.
No.
Are there other characters in there?
Well,
I wondered about the dad.
The dad. Now you see, I didn't really have a today's model to draw Clover's daddy upon, but maybe in a small way, you see, I did go back to my own father to help build and shape that character. Number one, my daddy was, after all, even in the totally segregated society, a teacher. He was a rural elementary school principal, and he had such a wonderful sense of fun in his own special way. And I pulled in some of those little things to build up and shape the character for Clover. But then when I felt I was really on safe ground, it's when I started writing about the farming life, what happens when peaches are great or they're not so good. And I just pulled in everybody. I pulled in all of those wonderful customers that come to my peach shed. And you want to know that's how I got my character, Sarah Kate? I based her on my customers that visited my peach shed. They don't even know it, bless their hearts.
But you thank them every day.
Book. Yes,
yeah.
I do.
And everybody can thank, them
I thank
because
them
we read
every
it.
day for coming there to spend a little time, talk a little so I could help to build their characters, sort of get into their world, and to buy my peaches and produce. I thank them every day.
Now, both your books, Dori, A Place of Her Own
Mm-hmm.
and plus Clover, come from the Black perspective. Your characters are African American. How hard it is to get into the minds, like you said, of white people.
And I still believe that I could not have written a convincing work if I had dared to try to first person that through a white woman named Sarah Kate. But because I did observe my customers who were white, some of the things that they would say I'd pick up on and to do. And because I was able to do that, I received a very high compliment from someone whose opinion I respect very highly. And she said that I so finely trace the life of a white woman that I made it believable that I was so familiar with a woman like Sarah Kate, but actually I wasn't. Mm-hmm. But I didn't try, and I think I tried to show that I wasn't familiar by not trying to get into her head. I talked about her and very rarely let her express her views because that would have been sort of getting into her head. But I let little Clover, a 10-year-old little girl, give her observations about her, and I allowed Clover, my central little narrator there, to be the guide to the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Because I was going to ask, what would your advice be to other writers if they wanted to try to mix races? Because that has got to be a difficult thing.
I think it is. I personally do, but it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
Sheer observation. But I think when it comes down to the point of view and that person that's going to really lead your character, I believe you need to really know pretty much where you're heading there if you want that character to become believable and you want your readers to at least care about them or feel strongly inclined to want to see how their life will work out. I think that you need to be pretty well familiar with your territory there and sort of find yourself on safe ground. But now, observation does play a wonderful part, because in my second novel, Her Own Place, the woman there, a farm woman, is working with a group of white women. So there, again, you have that feedback between the two.
Especially when she tries to get out, and she goes out, and she's a hospital volunteer.
Yes.
In the second book, Her Own Place.
Exactly.
She's trying to figure out if she even wants to get into that whole thing with all these white women, and she doesn't know them.
And then she's hesitant, and then she feels, no, I'm not going to do it at all. But it's her son who so encourages her to go ahead. And he mentions to her that it was a woman that so helped nurse him back to life when he was wounded in the war. And suddenly that was all he needed to say to his mama, to let her know, go there, help others. So I think in just again, having that interchange and working along with my wonderful customers at my wonderful peach shed, I don't think I could have done it without them.
Because it really brings to light a lot of issues you may not think about, like the food thing. We were talking about the food,
exactly.
You know, the pork and
the
Clover's
guilt.
talking about the guilt ointment. I'd never heard that before.
You never had heard that before?
I mean, we used the guilt trip, you know, but
See
guilt
there.
ointment was so good.
There. That's one of those little things I think that would have to do with a way of life. Then you see, that's when I think we sort of start to define, and we have the issues that present themselves there. And when it all boils down, I found that during my course of working with white and black, that it boils down pretty much to culinary and cultural differences that so often tends to divide. And I found that my wonderful, especially my northern transplanted customers who wouldn't look at a piece of okra to save their lives.
Or greens.
Or greens, or grits, or all of those wonderful things, I found that the more they were starting to taste and enjoy my foods, the closer we were becoming. Because I feel, how can I be friendly with someone who can't stand okra? Oh, very hard.
It's so slimy.
Yeah, but now there are many recipes. It doesn't have to be anymore, I assure you.
You know, and plus it's the whole fear thing and
fear
how to
thing.
cook it.
Yes.
You know, greens. What do you do with greens?
What do you do with them?
I mean, I wasn't raised in a family that we knew what to do with greens.
That's why I just decided for my northern customers and for my customers that were not familiar with, I just had to do me a cookbook. So I have a cookbook that's in the final stages now. Will be out January 1996, and it will be offering some foods that are to die for. There's an okra parmesan there that, it's truly wonderful. I worked to create it. And then with the greens, we don't just labor over them anymore like we used to the Southern way. I didn't for my northern customers and my friends who were not, for people who were not familiar with it. I now gently saute them, and I use a little light olive oil, and I've learned to use freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Changes the taste of everything.
It's not as good.
It's not as good to me, but they think it's heavenly.
Bacon and all sorts of stuff.
For me, I go, this is
this has no flavor.
No flavor, but they seem to really enjoy it. But I had to do something to sell the okra we grow on the farm. We do 3 to 4 acres of okra every year. It's a wonderful cash crop.
Now, talking about the farm and soil, I was talking to somebody about you, and he had interviewed you in the past, and he said, she's so into farming and the earth. And I said, you know, it's funny you say that, because soil comes up constantly in the books, in both books. There's mud on their shoes, there's soil everywhere.
There's something about the farming life that's so closely connected to the earth. It's so, I can't quite define it, but it seems that no matter how much you want to leave the farm, and yes, I do. I really want to leave the farm. It's hard work. I quit every year, but then my brothers quit every year too. But then we start back every spring. There's an old saying that once you get the soil, the dirt under your fingernails, it's something that's going to pull you right back there the following year. And it's true. I guess it's maybe because it in its own way offers such wonderful humility. What you're working against is something that doesn't bring a lot of stress, even when you lose it all, because you know it's not your fault. It's the weather. And so we have that to blame it on, and that causes us to sleep at night.
Let's talk a little bit about the first-person technique. Is that harder? Because you did that in Clover, with Clover.
And that is hard, because you see, actually, to do something first person means that you really have to be you have to have good territory, a good foundation there. And especially when an older person, as I am, decided to first person a novel through the voice of a 10-year-old little girl. I didn't know I was walking on troubled waters. I was just writing a little story. But it is a very tricky situation because a first-person point of view from an older mind is difficult because of a young child. There's so many things that's beyond their ken, their knowledge, their understanding here, that you have to be careful not to get out of the head.
And that might have been hard trying to write about when everybody came to the house and they were doing the morning thing and having the food, and Sarah Kate would go off somewhere else because she wanted to be alone. And you know, a 10-year-old is hard to, it's hard for them to figure that out.
But now there was one little thing that someone pointed, a critic actually, to my attention in connection with Clover that I was not even aware of, that while I have it in her voice, there is this writerly connection, this, quote, convention or knowledge between reader and writer, that just because this little girl is telling this story, it does not necessarily mean she understands everything she's talking about, but rather she is commenting on life, on things that's going on around her. So when we view her in our mind as not the presenter of facts, but as the deliverer of what she thinks about it.
She's like the commentator.
The commentator, that's the word I was searching for. Then it falls into a more believable situation, and that's how it happens.
And you observe such good details. You're very much a participant in life, aren't you?
I'm from that large family. We grew up telling stories, and we always wanted to outdo the other person. And then I had a brother who said I should be able to do something well in the voice of a young person, because he said my mind is sort of like limited there, and that I never ever really did grow up. But I remember my childhood with such happiness. And I think I was so happy then that it was easy for me to go back there and look in and maybe fine-tune those small details of growing up on a farm. And also being on the same farm where I grew up helped too.
How easy is it to sit down and write?
Oh, not easy for me at all. Oh, no. I am not accustomed to that sort of structure, just sitting facing four walls. So I tend to write between customers at the peach shed on little bits and pieces of paper, throw them into a big box. And writing for me is very much like making a garment. I just cut out a piece of dress, don't know where that sleeve of this part is going to fit in. And then when I'm forced to do it, I just sort of patch it together like a patchwork quilt, maybe.
Now, the first book, Clover, is it true? I've heard this story. This may be one of those gossipy things where it was just all sorts of pieces of paper.
That started like that.
It got sent to a publisher, and he put it together.
No, that was that. No? I had to put it together first. I wish they had been so obliging and so kind. But that's how it started with me. First on the back of a peach basket. When I saw that little girl, I started my story then, and that woman, when I after started on the back of a peach basket. I wish I had that basket now, but I don't. And then on that, from little scraps and pieces of paper, I don't type. No, I can, but I hate to, and I don't even know how to begin to use a computer. I don't know how to turn it on, to tell you the truth, but I did get a young girl to put it together in some form, and when she did that, I sent it to the publisher. But I did know to double space it because I couldn't read it when it was so close together, and that's why I did it that way. And then in that form, they liked it. They really did.
Have this patchwork of little pieces
that I pieced together and so made a little garment or a little dress, gave it to the publisher, 131 pages, and thought I'd written the longest book in the whole world. Even I did know the pages of Joy of Tolstoy's piece. What is it, War and Peace?
Yeah.
But still, I thought I was coming up 131 pages. And that's how many I sent. It ended up, though, however, with the wonderful editors telling me to flesh out my characters to 183 pages.
Did you do the same thing with Her Own Place?
Her Own Place was the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life because I received kind of like, rave reviews on the first one.
Right.
And then I started writing for critics, trying to second guess what they were going to say. And I worked on that book for 3 years. The most difficult thing.
Was it done in the same way, like
the same way?
Here
and I even lost on U.S. Air an entire manuscript, and they were wondering who would throw away a manuscript. I said, if you would notice the way Dori Sanders would put one together, you'd say, this is garbage. Someone threw all these things in the trash anyway. And I think that's how it got lost, and I had to do it all over again.
You had to write all over again.
All over
the
again.
second one.
And you know something? I did my cookbook almost the same way. And I started yet another novel. And I'm doing it the same way. But then I'm not quite young. And once you get a little older, someone said about her own place that if Grandma Moses had had a computer, she would have been just like Dori Sanders. Mm-hmm. So I still do it piecemeal.
And it works for you. So
It
can
does.
be done anyway, because
It can be.
writers find out this is the way you do to write a book, and this is the way.
And there is no set way. Whatever works for you to get that story out of your heart, head, mind, onto the paper, then do it. There's no set way that it has to be done. I tend to believe that.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to continue to do it that way.
I hope.
Yeah.
I hope.
I really enjoy these books because the characters, too, are so good. I was trying to explain this last night to someone. We were talking, and I said, I really like these characters because they're so kind, but they're commenting on things, but it's not done in a mean way. And he said, it sounds pretty unbelievable. It sounds like they're goody two-shoes. I said, no, but they're not. They're very real.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
It's hard to figure. How did you make these people so nice?
Well,
and
here's
I can still believe them.
All right, because I didn't set out to write a Pollyanna Bright in the Corner Where You Are book. Mm-hmm. I didn't set out to make them unbelievable. I guess I looked at the lives of real people. Farmers are without a doubt the most forgiving people in the whole world. You almost got to be a little bit unusual in order to keep farming. So I sort of based that and traced that on that. Now, there are a lot of people, of course, that's mean-spirited, but a lot of the problems that people think exist in South Carolina between black and white farmers with the racial things may happen in larger cities. I didn't deny that. I didn't try to address and say that this is the way things really are, but I said it on the basis of what I did know for myself. I know for a fact that for years, farmers, white and black, have always bonded together. Why? Because we're so dependent on one thing that affects us all, and that's the weather. Farmers tend to help. We've lived in that same farming community our entire lives, and if our crops were all gathered in and we had the rain coming in, we would help another white farmer. You think we got paid? Not a dime, because in the end, if that farmer had finished, that farmer would have been over there helping us. So I think it was that view of a landowner in the South and of a farming family that may have projected people. But there's some pretty mean-spirited ones there a little bit. But then in the end, it all boils down to that communality of spirit and soul that so binds people together, whether you want to or not. It's the weather, and we have no control over it.
When it rains, everybody's going to get wet.
Exactly.
And that's the way it is.
And that's the way it is. So I think that's what makes my characters the way they are. Mm-hmm. And that's how it happens.
Tips for writers just getting started. What would you tell them?
Look at life as you see it. Look at day-to-day living. Small truths. Simple details. Those are the sort of things that add up to stories that are larger than life. Base it on what you really know. Hold back on using a thesaurus that's going to throw too many things at you, and if something is good today, it's all right to say it's good tomorrow. Mm-hmm. You don't have to throw in another word to say that the biscuits have changed in their textures. If they're good today, it's okay to have them good tomorrow. So I say that simple approach, and let your observations find that story that's waiting for you to tell. And I believe that if you really have a story to tell, you'll do it whether you want to or not.
Mm-hmm. Because to be successful, you don't always have to be published. Right?
Exactly. But I think if you write a wonderful story, you will be. Mm-hmm. I think you will.
How does the rejection come to you? I mean, how do you handle that?
Isn't it something that at first off I didn't have it happen until I was an established writer, and then my cookbook was rejected, so I just put it under my bed. And after they rejected my cookbook, I just went out and told everybody what I'd done. I've written a cookbook, I said. They say, when is it going to come out? I don't know, but if y'all get in touch with my publishers, they'll tell you. Can you believe that's the way I handle rejection?
Really?
Yes. And ended up being invited to do the cookbook because people were wanting to know when it was going to come out. But that's an old thing. Farmers have their own little ways of getting things done. But I handle rejection in the way that I know so many successful writers have been rejected many, many times. And I say to them, just do it better the next time. Because when I turned in various parts of Her Own Place to the publishers, no good. Rewrite. So let me tell you, accept it. And in the end, as in the words of William Faulkner, stay with it. And if you stay with it, you will prevail.
And that's a great place to end because we're out of time too. I want to thank you for being here on Writer to Writer. Thanks for joining us. I'm Susan Shaw, and Writer to Writer is a program for and about writers sponsored by the Florida Community College at Jacksonville.